So here we have the Angevin Empire at the death of Richard I. And the Angevin Empire started, initially it's started with Henry II, who was the son of Empress Matilda, who was the daughter of Henry I, and he wanted her to succeed him as his son had died earlier, well, his legitimate son, and the lords said they would back Matilda, but after his death they did not, and Stephen of Blois, his nephew, succeeded him, and there was a civil war and times of troubles, but nonetheless Stephen was king. And she married, initially she's called Empress Matilda because she married the Holy Roman Emperor, but they didn't have any children and he died. And her second husband was a man named Geoffrey of Anjou, who would be the father of Henry II. And Geoffrey is where you get the name Angevin, obviously, from Anjou. It's a province, and you also get the name Plantagenet from him as well, as he wore like a flower in his hair, like a laurel. It's called, the Latin name is Plantageneris, or some nonsense like that. Anyways, that's a side note. Henry II married Eleanor of Aquitaine and consolidated a big chunk of France, and he took 2,000 soldiers and crossed the Channel into England, and there was a civil war. Henry II showed promise and competence, and he restlessly kind of marched around, showing that he, was competent. He won some battles, relieved some sieges, and then there was a peace with Stephen. His son initially was upset because Stephen adopted Henry II as his son, so he would succeed him, and I believe his name is Eustace. He took up a fit and started seizing lands and burning and pillaging and sacking church land. So they didn't like that. But anyway, he died suddenly, kind of randomly, interestingly enough, at the perfect time for Henry II. Maybe he was poisoned, I don't know. But they then, Henry II was the heir apparent, and then when Stephen died, you have Henry II as king. And as king, he ruled England and about, 3/4 of France, half of France, somewhere in there. He had more people under his French lands than English, obviously, significantly more. And significantly more profitable for sure. But he didn't delegate very well, but he had quite a few sons. Initially, one named Henry, the young king. He died, I believe, in a joust. But there was also, Richard, another Henry. He had a few sons, and he didn't delegate power well. Before Henry the young king died, there was a rebellion, and Eleanor of Aquitaine was involved, and what would be later Richard the Lionheart was involved. And they lost, but it was only a matter of time. And then there was another rebellion, and with the aid of the French crown, and this time Henry II and Richard the Lionheart were on the same side, and because they took some of Richard's lands in Aquitaine, who was initially supposed to succeed his mother Eleanor in Aquitaine, in the Duchy of Aquitaine, and then they, in the end, they got the power they wanted as Henry II aged and died, unfortunately betrayed kind of by all of his sons, even his favorite John Lackland, who he was trying to get his own lands. But as a side point, so he died, and then Richard succeeded him, and there was some contention with Philip Augustus, who is one of my favorite French kings. He actually, we'll get to that. Richard and him kind of were initially kind of friends, and then not friends once he was king, and Philip was king, and they had these border skirmishes and all sorts of nonsense, and then they went on crusade together to the Holy Land initially, but Philip didn't stick around for too long, and you end up having Richard, engage in what would be the Third Crusade, really, Battle of Jaffa, Saladin, those skirmishes, having victories over Saladin and I believe what's called the Ayyubid Empire throughout the Levant to Egypt, really. Initially, after Saladin died, his chosen son to succeed was overthrown by a brother and uncle. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Let's get back to the point. So Richard was quite successful, helping some of the Crusader states survive, but didn't have the needed force to take Jerusalem. So he left. There's a famous kind of like rivalry between Saladin and Richard that I could talk about in greater detail later. It's kind of interesting. They were kind of pen pals and all that jazz, and they obviously, Richard Lionheart was pretty successful. He just didn't have the numbers, and Saladin respected him. I believe he said it. Now, this is not a direct quote, it's interpretation, but we can read it later. That if he was to lose Jerusalem, it would be to him, and he would prefer that, as he was a enemy that he saw as an honorable and competent rival. But anyways, Richard has to go back. He travels overland, and he gets put in jail by the Holy not by the Holy Roman Empire, but I believe by maybe the Duke of, I'll have to look it up, I'm not sure. But anyways, he gets locked up and there's a ransom that's about 2 years or a year of the revenue from the crown of England. Not France. France was much more profitable at that point and much more populous, and just the parts of France that Edward ruled was significantly more populous than what would be England at that point. I'm just spitting this off the top of my head, so I'll do a little bit more digging and talk about some things a little bit later. But yeah, this eventually Richard gets home and he rules, and there's, like I said, all types of nonsense going on still. I mean, and that's kind of why he had to go home. Philip II had his brother John Lackland, he was playing politics and making him, rebel to help his reconquest, basically, of what he saw as French territory. So Richard arrives back, kind of puts a stop to that, puts a stop to John. Richard never has any children. I don't remember who he married. He was supposed to marry what would be Philip II's half-sister from his father. There was an agreement anyways, which is ironic because Richard's mother technically would have been, was married also, would have been, if she would have stayed married, well, she didn't, but she was married to Philip II's father for a brief period, and they had a daughter, but Richard was engaged to another daughter, I think it's Philip II's sister or half-sister, and they, from a young age, and she lived at the English court actually, and Richard's father, Henry II, actually, did the deed with her and was kind of a womanizer. So I don't blame Richard for never having children with her. I don't know. He probably should have figured something out, unfortunately. He was kind of into that Aquitaine chivalry romanticism, kind of, because he was supposed to succeed Eleanor in Aquitaine. He did not. He did, but he succeeded as the king of the Angevin Empire, the whole empire, Aquitaine being the largest duchy in France, but just a part of what's called the Angevin Empire. And he should have probably divorced her, regardless of what pressure the throne in France would have put on the Pope to uphold the marriage. He should have just done it. But anyways, he did not, and he died at a siege. I believe he was shot with a crossbow accidentally, and in fact didn't want, there's a story, I don't know if it's true, didn't want any harm to come to the man who accidentally had shot him with the crossbow. But anyways, he died of dysentery, like, a lot of the kings and people did in the Middle Ages. Obviously, it's probably the most common way to die at that period. But anyways, Richard died in 1199 AD, and was succeeded by